Hello there, everybody. This is Alan Feldman from the Laguna Woods Democratic Club. Thank you for taking your time to watch today. And today we're doing another segment. I believe it's the fifth of the program, Black in Laguna Woods. If you were watching us last week, we did something a little different. We commented, we heard Reverend Dr. Charles Dorsey gave a talk to the Laguna Woods Democratic Club. Some of you might have seen it. It was our February meeting, and it's been on TV all month with Village TV. It's just that we found that this discussion, the talk that he gave, was it was so multi-layered. He's such a dynamic speaker to begin with, and he's just so multi-layered and so thought-provoking that it was worth discussing what he said. And as always, we started to discuss what he said and we ran out of time. We only have a half hour. So we're going to do it again today. And the people who were with us on the panel last week have graciously decided to do it, to sit back down here and do it this time. So I'm going to introduce them this time, because if you've ever seen the show, you know who they are. They've been on before. I'm going to go from the left to the right on my screen. We have, starting at my left, is Dr. Fran Williams. On my right is Sandra Fairley. And the other square there below to the left is Gloria Williams. So once again, thank you all for being here again, and thank you for doing it again in just a week. I know it can be an imposition. So I want to get started right where we left off, if that's okay with everybody. And where we left off, we talked about one of the things that Dr. Dorsey said, Reverend Dr. Dorsey said, was this entire racial problem that we have. Part of it is a problem of our soul. And we'd all discussed that, what that meant to us. I want to go through one of the other things he said, which I can't remember where he actually brought it up, whether it was right after that or in answer to another question. But somebody asked about reparations. And he talked a little bit, well, they could be this, they could be that. But then he kind of stopped and said, well, how do you pay reparations for the soul? And, I have a couple of ideas about that, but I want to hear your ideas. Maybe I'll give my idea, maybe I won't. But I want to hear what you guys think about that. What do you think he meant? And what do you think we can do about it? And Sandra, why don't we start with you first? Why don't you just kick it off and tell us what you think he meant and what you think we can do about
it? I think he posed probably the most important question of them all. The fact is, and he said something like, just throwing money and land and material things does not repair the damage to the soul. And I think he really didn't answer how to do it. I think he gave it to us as a discussion point. How do you repair the damage to a person's essence or being or soul? And how do you do that to a whole nation of people, to a whole race of people who have this damage to their being, to their essence? And so how do we do it? I'm not sure. I think you have to do things one step at a time. You have to start someplace. And I think that's why, there's a tendency to just try to go to the material things, but it's way more than that.
Yeah, that's what people think when they hear reparations. They think of money handed over. So let's go down the screen here. And Gloria, how about you? What did you think? Something to add, or what you think of what you thought of Dorsey's comment?
Actually, I went back and listened to Dr. Dorsey again, and I'm certainly in sync with the things that Sandra just said about calculating reparations of the soul. How can you give any tangible weight to damage to a person's soul? I think Sandra used the term essence, the psyche. And I just came to the same conclusion that Dr. Dorsey did, that, it's just still a question. I don't know that, we yet have the answer. And as I listened to him and started thinking too about, personal experiences, I just threw mine out the window and started looking back to long before I was born, because he mentioned, the early 1900s and W.E.B. Du Bois and all of the things that have happened in the interim and that are still happening. So I think that may be one of the questions that we have to put on our list of to be determined.
Dr. Fran, how about you? Anything to add to that? Or what do you think?
I agree with everything that my two colleagues have said in terms of asking the question. But I think the first place you start, if there is a starting place, I have to go to my clinical analysis, and that is realize and identify that repayment is needed or that the problem exists. And I think we've taken the first step in verbalizing that there really is a problem. The problem really does exist. And so the next step would be, what do you do about it? And when you're talking about the intangibles, when you're talking about, as Sandra said, the very essence of a human, the very soul of the matter, you have to start with thinking there is no payment as we understand payment to be, because we usually think of money, and there certainly is no money. That's not to say that money would not be needed or necessary, because money in this society has controlled so much of our being in terms of our quality of life. But when you're looking at the big payoff, I would think you would look at a combination of things. And aside from identifying that there is a problem, would be, what might you consider the most important of anyone's life or any group's life? And it took me back to the idea and the movement that's happening right now today in terms of Black Lives Matter. To recognize that, to acknowledge that, to show respect for the lives of a people, to move away from the making human life of a Black individual a fraction, as we had been, and on the records as we had been, and to change the view, not just on paper, but to change the view in the minds and the realities and the realization of members of other groups, would be a way of starting to repay.
When I first heard him say, I'm going to add my 2 cents into that, so I hope it's okay. But when I heard that, what I thought of, I kind of agree with all of you, and I agree that what he's talking about is the essence of people, and I don't have a solution either, but I just look at it as people who were brought to this country, African Americans who were brought to this country as slaves. They were ripped from their culture. They were ripped from their homeland. They were ripped from their families. They were forbidden for speaking their language. They were forbidden for practicing their religion. They were forbidden from doing what their families and ancestors had done for thousands of years, whatever that might have been, hunter-gatherers, but now they were all, not all, but mostly farm laborers. And this was taken away from them. And you're kind of like free floating without a real sturdy base. And I see that happening, and I see to some degree, I think that happened to Native Americans also. Many of the same strictures put against people of color, Black people, were put against Native Americans. It's the same kind of thing. And when we look at the economic situation now, they're really the two major ethnic racial groups in our country that are at the bottom economically and so forth are people of color, Black people and Native Americans. And I don't think that that's a coincidence. I think it stems directly from that. As far as the solution is concerned, we could start with "I'm sorry." We see what our ancestors did, and we see that it was wrong, and we see how it's affected you for these many years. And we'll start with that. Maybe we'll start with that. Maybe that's a place to start. I don't know. That's just my thoughts. People, I'm really more interested in your thoughts. If I'm looking at it from the outside, it affects me differently, without a doubt. So I want to get to me, people like me next. One of the things that Reverend Dr. Dorsey talked about, he called it white fragility. And that's something that I'm interested in. I wasn't quite sure how he meant that, whether white people hear that this is a problem and they break up in little pieces, or get defensive, or what. So I'm interested in what you guys think of that. What do you think Reverend Dorsey meant when he said white fragility? And again, is there something that's something other than time will take care of? Is there something we can do? I don't know. Oh, by the way, when it gets to reparations, I don't know if you guys saw it or not, but I saw an article in the newspaper yesterday. The city of Evanston, Illinois, has set aside I think $10 billion or $10 million. I'm sorry, I don't remember. For reparations for their African American and Black citizens. They put this money in the form of housing grants. So it's a way to build up people's wealth, which is one of the things that, weren't necessarily robbed from African Americans, just forbidden from gaining any. But I don't know that it soothes the soul or not. I guess that would remain to be seen. But again, that's a start also. But anyway, let's talk about white fragility. So Dr. Fran, are white people fragile when it comes to dealing with issues of race? Are they afraid of it? I don't know. I don't know what fragile really means in this instance.
Fragility in my terms, and to my understanding, it is the tendency to fall apart or to move away from something that is threatening, something that is uncomfortable, and the tendency to simply deny or not discuss. An interesting thing is happening right now. And speaking of, in our response to Reverend Dr. Dorsey and the things that he said, I've been attending a series that's being done by Reverend Dr. Steve Marsh. He has a white congregation here in Laguna Woods, over at Geneva Press. And his thing is to white people, and they're all white that he's talking to, you have to, now that you've been forced to recognize and acknowledge there is a problem, what are you going to do about it? And how are you going to do about it? If talking about it, his words, if talking about it makes you uncomfortable, imagine doing something, some concrete action about it. And do you come to understand that we're all one people? How is that? We're all one people. We know, and we've been given this myth that whites are in some way superior. And you have this privilege going, when will you come to a point of understanding that this is in fact a myth? So when you talk about the fragility, it's, are you prepared to break down or to contradict many of these myths that you've been brought up to believe, you know,
Yeah,
and
you know,
prepared to act on? So
when you were talking, I was thinking the great comedy album, Mel Brooks and Carl Reiner album, 2,000-Year-Old Man. One of the questions he asked the 2,000-year-old man is, "Did you have music?" And he said, "Oh yes, we have music. Here was our first song. Hooray for Cave 58! It's the best cave in the world." You know, so to me, that's, we've been going on. I don't know if that was comedy or history, because we've been going on along those lines for years. So, Gloria, let me ask you next, just really the same question: what you think about that? What you think about white fragility?
Well, I guess the first thought that would come to mind would be the very weak Southern belle who's being protected from reality, and who's at the point of fainting when she finds out some of the stuff that's really going on. And I would dare not assign that picture to today's world. But I think it's a matter of, and I think Dr. Dorsey talked about this, a matter of just maybe closing eyes and ears to reality situations. And much of it, I think, when people would say, I was not a part of what happened to you or to your ancestors, that can be a cop out. I was listening to something just last night, a discussion on that particular matter. And I don't think that those of us who were related to the recipients or the victims of stuff that happened, a couple of 100 years ago, necessarily blame the power structure in today's world about what happened then. But I think what we are blaming them tends to be what is not being done about it, what has not been done about it, what is not being done today. And since you mentioned something humorous, I heard something last night too that said, well, one step that we're making toward progress is we're talking about it and February has passed. So maybe we're on the right road.
Really?
Here we are in March and we're still talking about it. So maybe, if the dialogue continues, and I think there has to be a lot of dialogue, and even prayers for change of heart, and for people really coming together to know each other on an intimate, personal basis before you can talk about, stop judging me by what you consider Black means.
Right.
I don't think there's a real answer right now, Alan. I think it's just still a work in progress.
Yeah, isn't it all? Sandra, what's your take on the situation?
I think one of the things Dr. Dorsey was referring to is even our own conceptions as Black people when we talk with white people. And a lot of times we hold back, maybe because we understand the damage to the soul. So we don't want to offend our white friends, because if we tell it like it really is, some are going to be offended because they're going to believe that, you're calling them a racist. I had a neighbor that one day asked me if I thought he was a racist. I said, no. And we went on with conversation, but the point is that sometimes people are racist and don't understand that they are. And so we tend to hold back what we really could share because of the white fragility. He's talked about the fact that a lot of whites won't use the word racism. They'll say prejudice, or they'll say inequities. And of course, so when you change the word, then the reparation or remedies become something to just soothe those those problems. So white fragility is limiting an open discussion, an honest discussion, because of a need we have not to offend someone else when we're explaining how there has been assault made on our own essence. So that in itself is another problem. I heard this morning on TV a conversation on The View, and they were talking about reparations being made to, I think it's farmers in, I can't remember if it was West Virginia, but one of the southern states, where the farmers, Black farmers, have historically been denied some of the federal funds and state funds provided to farmers. I mean, it's a historical thing that they couldn't get the kinds of money that was supplied to help and encourage individual farmers, especially with the onslaught of these large corporate farms. They were helping the small individual farmers. Well, they didn't give it to the Black farmers. And so, the Black farmers have been talking about it and campaigning for it. And finally, they made a decision to give reparations to them. And so they were discussing that this morning on one of these, the talk shows, one of the most popular talk shows, with a bunch of women. And one of the members said, well, I don't understand why they didn't give it to women. And right away, it was, I don't even think they answered it correctly, because I could have said, because it was Black people who were discriminated against. That's the damaged group. And so every time we have an option or an opportunity to try to help or repair some of the things with Black people, we always have groups of people who are calling foul. They're wait a minute. Sure. We didn't do that, and you're now discriminating against us. And so there's this fragility, and there's always this attempt to somehow balance it. Like, why didn't they give it to women? Well, because we're not talking about women right now. We're talking about Black people. And right now, that's what we need to look at. It's just like, I believe we should be talking about Asian people because of what we're seeing right now.
Right.
Then, of course, we need to talk about Asian people, and then we need to talk about Black people. It's not always the same thing, but there's a fragility in white people that they don't want to face, that historically there has been a problem. And we know that you didn't do it. But I think, as Dr. Dorsey pointed out, we use history on everything else. Yeah. See, you use rental histories, and you use this kind of history. Yeah. We use legacies and letting people into the major universities of this country. Your dad went there. But when it comes to looking at the history, we shy away, and we worry about white fragility.
I think one of the things that comes to mind is the residue. You know, when you hear from a white person, we didn't do it, or I didn't do it, you might not have done it, but we're still dealing with the residue of what was done by your ancestors. And it's right here, very apparent in any city, USA. It's apparent that the residue is there because institutional racism that's most effective throughout our country is alive and well and functioning. So tell them about the residue of what they didn't do, but somebody in their family did.
What it reminds me of, just briefly, because of course we're running out of time as we always do, but it's like when the sports teams like the Atlanta Braves or the former Washington Redskins or the Kansas City Chiefs, when they get into the playoffs, there's always lots of cameras around the stadium. Many times there'll be people who are protesting the names of these teams, saying that they're offensive.
Right.
And what you get is a bunch of white people going up there saying, no, they're not. Those aren't offensive names. Well, they're not offensive to you. But here I am. I'm a Native American, and I'm telling you, calling Native Americans Redskins is offensive. Why is it your business? Why are you telling me it's not offensive? But anyway, that's the same kind of thing. I think that it reminds me to. We are running out of time, but I just want very, if we could be very briefly, Sandra, I will start with you on this. One of the other things that Reverend Dr. Dorsey mentioned was, and somebody else on this program had mentioned it too, kind of in passing, exhaustion. He says it's exhausting. And it's exhausting to try to explain to people the way you feel. And it's exhausting also to deal with things that people don't even realize can be offensive or difficult to deal with, or even taken more than one way. So Sandra, again, we're running out of time, so just try to keep it short. But Sandra, I want you to start. What do you feel about that? Is it hard for people who are not white people in this society to lead a regular life?
Well, certainly. And our life isn't regular. And I, for one, am happy my life isn't regular. But again, I've had some very positive things happen in my life, but there are many people who haven't had that, and who never had a chance for whatever reason there is. And just being born Black, it's almost like you're one step behind. You're always a step behind, and therefore you got to take double steps in order to just make it. And some of us have been blessed and favored in some way or another, but it is exhausting when someone asks you. It's exhausting to worry about white fragility sometimes because you hold back and you can't say what you're really feeling. So yes, it is exhausting. And it was Alan who said that.
What was it? I couldn't remember if it was Alan or Leroy.
He got tired of going out of his way to be friendly, that sometimes you get tired of it.